Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2007 to 2008 event story, The Death of Captain America. Normally I cover entire comic series, but that can sometimes be hard to do because it can sometimes be hard to determine when a series exactly starts or ends. This story, for example, comes 25 issues into Volume 5 of Captain America, which picked up immediately from where Volume 4 left off. And before this creative team ended their run on this series, it would jump straight from issue 50 to issue 600 because it returned to the original numbering of the first volume of Captain America. And still even later, the series writer would continue the series under the different name of Captain America and Bucky. And if you're not a huge comic nerd like me, that sentence probably just made zero sense to you. But it illustrates my point that it's hard for me to state exactly what issues of what series I should cover if, say, I wanted to cover Ed Brubaker's run as writer on Captain America comics. Which I absolutely do and theoretically could at some point in the future, but there's just so much math involved and math is dumb. So instead, I've opted for covering specific story arcs during Brubaker's run. So probably to most people, it would make the most sense for me to start with the first major story arc of his run, Winter Soldier. And you're right, it absolutely would make the most sense for me to start there so I could spend less time in this video explaining who Bucky is. And how he's supposed to have died, but came back as a brainwashed Soviet killing machine named Winter Soldier. But then Cap helped free him from control and now he's a good guy once again. But even though it probably would be the smart thing to do, I'm not gonna. For two main reasons. One is that this comic sold better, which is a little weird when you think about it because the Winter Soldier story was probably more impactful on actual comic fans. But Cap dying? We've been there before. Like in the 90s, when Superman died, only to come back about a year later and reveal that he never really died at all, in a sense. Many at the time of Cap's death were probably like me in assuming that this was a similar stunt that would last about as long. After all, one of the oldest comic characters to actually stay dead had literally just returned to life in this very series. Cap's old junior partner, Bucky Barnes. And, of course, they could always pull some kind of switcheroo like they had done in the past, introducing the concept that other people had simply played the role of Captain America at various times. Even ones that had convinced themselves that they were actually Steve Rogers himself. Death is just not very permanent in comics. I mean, unless you're a disposable female love interest that can be shoved off a bridge or into a fridge, am I right, guys? The other reason is because it's one of the stories that most completely encapsulates the mood of the post-9/11 world in comics, resonating so thoroughly with audiences that it's even clearly the inspiration behind the better two Captain America movies almost in their entirety. And since it's July 4th and that means I wanted to do a Captain America comic, I really wanted to do one that I really thought would fit the mood of this year. And I have to say, given recent events, given growing news, and now adding into this list the absolute garbage that is recent Supreme Court decisions, the bleak, broody outlook expressed in this story seemed like the perfect fit to be the story I covered this year. Or maybe I'm just crazy. Let's find out and take this away. The comic opens on Captain America in handcuffs. You can't actually see the handcuffs, in fact they'll literally never show them, but trust me, they're there. Or maybe they're not, because maybe they just trust him because he's Cap. Even though he is under arrest. Look, the point is he's under arrest. Because this comic immediately follows the end of the superhero Civil War, which really was less of a superhero civil war and more of a superhero big squabble. I mean, it was basically that first half of basically any random superhero crossover where instead of just talking to each other and explaining that they're both after the same bad guy, the two heroes instead randomly decide to blame the other guy for being responsible and they fight for pretty much no reason until they finally have a nice good bro moment and realize they actually are after the same thing, so we can get a second half where they actually go after the bad guy. All of this was explained by Deadpool in my BP vs. DP episode. Whoa, I I should probably not phrase it that way. Anyway, the only problem is that with Civil War, we didn't get that second half where they go after some bad guy. Instead, it just ended extremely randomly and suddenly on Cap, leader of the Revolution, surrendering to Iron Man, leader of the establishment side, for basically no reason whatsoever. And so now Cap is being brought to court to potentially face charges for his open rebellion against the United States government. Imagine a public figure actually facing consequences for, like, trying to overthrow a majority decision made by popular vote? What nonsense. Only plenty of people don't want him to face those consequences. One of those people being Nick Fury, who is working with the recovered Bucky Barnes, his memory mostly restored, to plot a desperate last-minute escape attempt for Cap. But another of those is Red Skull. Skull was killed by the Winter Soldier before he could unleash plans he had earlier in the series, but those plans involved the Cosmic Cube. You may remember the Cosmic Cube as the thing that allowed Thanos to become a giant space face in an earlier review I did, except you probably haven't watched that review, so never mind. Here, it allowed Red Skull to leap his consciousness into the body of Alexander Lukin, the former Soviet general that had taken control of the Winter Soldier program and current head of the Corporation Cronus, which is going to become important throughout this story. By this point, though, Skull was largely the one in control, and his plan here for Captain America involves a sniper. Cap spots the sniper and attempts to protect everyone, but takes a shot, and this creates chaos. Sharon Carter, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Agent 13 and former Captain America girlfriend, attempts to get to Cap in the mess, only for more shots to go off and Cap to collapse on the steps of the court. They attempt to rush Cap to the hospital, but he dies on the way over, which means, yeah, we're actually opening this with Cap's death. You're not sitting through a bunch of issues of some baddie storming across the country to get to the thing that's in the title. Straight off the bat, Cap is dead. So Bucky's rescue plan flips immediately to chasing down the sniper, only for him to find himself in one of those first halves of a superhero crossover I mentioned, as Falcon attacks him, assuming that he is the sniper. But Bucky wasn't around for when those crossover rules were established, so he actually talks to the Falcon and explains that he's not the killer. So they go and search for the actual sniper together, who is, turns out, a guy named Crossbones, a regular Captain bad guy. As in a bad guy Captain America, not a guy named Captain you know what I mean. They capture him fairly easily, but at the hospital we see Sin, the current bad guy name of Red Skull's daughter, Cynthia Schmidt. She's in disguise as a nurse, and she shows up to Sharon and tells her to remember, and then she does. And what she remembers is that she was the one that killed Captain America. Yep. It seems this is because yet another old Captain America villain has teamed up with the Red Skull, this time a guy named Dr. Faustus. He's essentially a glorified hypnotist, or maybe more like a super hypnotist, able to control people's minds and get them to do almost whatever he wants. A trick old comic book creators used to love because it let them make covers that were like, "Oh no, why is our hero acting like a villain?" Faustus has apparently managed to worm his way into S.H.I.E.L.D., posing as a legitimate psychologist, giving him direct access to a disturbingly large number of agents inside the group, including Sharon Carter. So he brainwashes her to kill Captain America, and eventually that control will even lead her to attack the Falcon and Black Widow and defect to the Skull's side. Faustus also brainwashed a number of other agents into simply surrendering to Sin and her Serpent Squad, a group of lame snake-themed villains that don't even have a full boy band group going on. I mean, where's the shirtless sexy one? You're failing, Serpent Squad. Sin and the squad replace S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to break Crossbones out of S.H.I.E.L.D. custody, which finally alerts Tony Stark, who has been the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. since the end of Civil War, to the problem with their resident psychologist. Which also finally lets him realize that the only person with the means to actually succeed in assassinating Cap was Sharon, who had in fact also been seeing the psychologist. It probably also didn't help her any earlier that when Tony asked her to identify Steve's body, she said, "What did I do?" Not that he found out in time to stop her turning against her friends and running away. Luckily, Falcon's psychic connection to birds lets him follow her, and he and Black Widow attack the Red Skull's facility. But there's a complication in that Bucky is also there. See, following Cap's death, Bucky began blaming Tony Stark, which It's fair. And so decides he's going to kill the maybe not so Iron Man. To achieve this, he decides he's first going to need Cap's shield, which was supposedly being kept in a Captain America museum, but Bucky saw right through that. Instead, he used his connection to Nick Fury to hack into a life model decoy, a sort of full-size, lifelike robotic copy of Nick Fury used to retcon anytime that Nick Fury dies, and thus trick Stark into trying to transport the shield that he has of course kept out of storage where he's been keeping it into another facility. This gives us some insight into the fact that when Natalia Romanoff was being turned into a Red Room agent, she apparently met a then as yet not fully brainwashed Bucky, and the two had some sort of romantic relationship. It was strong enough for Black Widow that after she defected, she even attempted to go back for Bucky, only to find him in suspended animation and assume that there was nothing she could do for him. Funny though how she never mentioned any of this to Captain America. Did she not know at the time who he was? And I guess never happened to see a picture of Bucky and go, gee, he looks familiar. Whatever. After hearing about Crossbones being broken out of jail, Bucky goes back to Lucan to try and get a lead on Red Skull so he can hunt down Crossbones, not realizing that Skull and Lucan are now one and the same. But Skull quickly reveals this information to Bucky, never being one to not brag when he has the chance, and even uses an old failsafe word from the Winter Soldier program to shut down Bucky's brain so he can be captured. Faustus then attempts to mind control Bucky so they can have the Winter Soldier under their control again, but this proves repeatedly unsuccessful. Once Falcon and Black Widow start their attack on the facility, Faustus immediately abandons ship and tries to take both Sharon and Bucky with him. But with Falcon hot on their tail, which that's really a weird phrase, I should stop using that, Sharon in a brief act of defiance dumps Bucky out of the back of their escape vehicle so that the Falcon drops his pursuit in order to save Bucky from certain death. S.H.I.E.L.D. arrests Bucky for the trouble he stirred up, but that doesn't last long, because in what has to be the most unintentionally hilarious moment of the entire comic, Bucky's cybernetic arm grows a mind of its own and goes on a rampage through the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. Seriously, this really happens. This was probably intended to be one of the coolest moments of the entire series, but I can't stop laughing about it. I mean, can you just imagine it? There's this arm and it's just all on its own and flapping about everywhere, punching and tripping people and crawling through air vents like a worm. Is that not funny to anyone else? S.H.I.E.L.D. quite conveniently brought Bucky right where he wanted to be, the safe haven of Tony Stark, floating above the world in the helicarrier where he was unable to reach before. But though Bucky proves remarkably efficient at attacking Iron Man, Tony manages to quickly end the fight by revealing that Captain America left them a letter. So he shows the letter to Bucky, where Steve asks Iron Man to both save Bucky and guarantee that Captain America, as a brand, as a symbol, would live on past his death. With that request, Tony and Bucky come to the conclusion that there's only one person to fill Steve's pansy red booties, his old junior partner and current holder of the S.H.I.E.L.D., Bucky Barnes himself. And I could probably rant for like 10 minutes about just how much it pisses me off that we have this scene in this story so immediately following Civil War where Tony just so quickly and readily accepts an unregistered masked vigilante running around as if it's no BFD when he literally just killed Bill Foster and caused Cap's death in a giant superhero civil war to prevent exactly that kind of thing from happening. Can you live with that, Tony? Can ya? But I'll try and refrain. For now! So they cut him a new outfit, with Bucky insisting it be clear that he's not the same exact person, just the flag carrier so to speak, and just in time. Because Skull, via Lucan's corporation Cronus, has crashed the American economy by forcing foreclosures on millions of houses across the country and driving up gas prices through the roof. Not higher than they are right now though, am I right, fellow adults? Adult things, yeah. This leads to a protest at the very gates of the White House, but suspecting that there's more going on, Bucky and Widow head down to keep an eye on the situation while Tony stays up in the helicarrier to monitor the news. Which mostly just seems to be not particularly subtle references to Lost. Man, remember when people liked Lost? Me neither. Turns out they were right to be suspicious, as some of Faustus's brainwashed S.H.I.E.L.D. agents turn out to be the agents guarding the White House gates, and for no damn reason at all, they open fire on the protesters. Wow, it's almost like N.K. Jemisin wasn't the first one to suggest police intended to serve and protect could disturbingly easily cross the line into being more of a danger to those they're supposed to be helping than they are a benefit. But yeah, I'm sure she's just like an SJW snowflake or something. Where was I? This, of course, just leads to more protest, and one senator named Gordon Wright announces that he's replacing SHIELD's duties in DC with a private security firm, a company that just happens to be owned by Cronus, and therefore Lucan/Red Skull, but Bucky continues to monitor the situation around the protest and discovers that hallucinogenic-laced water has been passed out to the protesters so that Faustus can push them on into rioting. During that riot, Sin and her Serpent Squad also show up to supposedly attack Senator Wright. Bucky, though, as the new Captain America, mostly stops the faked attack, but Skull's people still doctor the security footage to make it seem that Wright's private security firm saved his life from the Serpent Squad. Wright then successfully, major air quotes, negotiates with the Cronus Corporation to reverse its policies on the housing foreclosures and gas prices, and things calm down relatively. All this combines to make Wright look like a hero, and he forms a third party to announce his candidacy for president, going on air to talk about how he's going to drain the swamp and make America better again than it has been for the past several years, theoretically, possibly, and etc, etc. You know, all that nonsense political talking points that Americans would never believe. Ha, ha, ha. This is then bolstered even further when he's again targeted for assassination for no apparent reason, and his life is saved by Captain America? Dun dun dun! Yes, it seems we have another Captain America who walks, talks, and even looks like Steve Rogers, even wearing the same uniform down to those pansy red booties I mentioned. But this is William Burnside, although by this point in the continuity he hadn't been given a real name yet and was usually referred to as either the Grand Director or the Captain America of the 1950s. See, after World War II ended, Captain America's stories lost a little of their thunder and eventually stopped. Stan Lee attempted to revive the character in the 50s, but since he no longer had Nazis to fight, he had to instead fight enemies at home, which would primarily be commies. But communism isn't as outright frightening to people as Nazism, since most of the problem with it comes from specific dictators claiming communism rather than the philosophy itself, which is mostly harmless. Add to that a rush of unpopular McCarthyism that tended to conveniently label anyone they wanted as a communist to make them an enemy of the state, and you have a recipe for too many mixed feelings and messages for the character to work. So that was abandoned completely, and when Cap was brought back for the Avengers, Lee just pretended his 1950 stories had never happened. But one of my favorite things about comics is the way creators work to explain out-of-character stories and fit them back into continuity. It's one of the best things about Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run. And that happened here, with this Captain America being a guy who transformed himself to look more like Steve, taking his name, and even injecting himself in a replacement Bucky with super soldier serum to make them strong. But that serum was imperfect and made them paranoid and psychotic. He was supposed to have died by setting himself on fire, but Red Skull apparently preserved him in some kind of stasis and revives him now to serve his purposes. Faustus then does a Clockwork Orange-style brainwash on him, convincing him that the current Captain America Bucky Barnes is evil and even actually killed Bucky, which is probably kind of a confusing sentence, but is also something that did happen. The Jack Monroe Bucky, the one who was the sidekick to the Captain America of the 50s, was killed by the then still brainwashed Winter Soldier in an earlier issue of this series to frame him for a bombing in Philadelphia. So Willie Cap makes an appearance here, even endorsing Skull's puppet candidate in order to draw Bucky out for a fight, which he successfully does, but when Bucky reveals who he really is, it breaks William's already fragile brain and he goes on the run. Bucky and Falcon follow him until he's captured by Hydra agents, who then bring him to the Skull's base, which they then attack because poor Sharon Carter is still a prisoner, as you've probably forgotten by now, though she did try to escape a couple times earlier. On the first time, she found the William Cap, and initially thinking it might actually be Steve, she attempted to bring him with her, which got her caught. The second time, she tried to sneak out by kidnapping Sin and forcing her to lead them both out of the base. But Sin fought back, and in the struggle, Sin ended up stabbing Sharon straight in the womb. And I do mean that. And that is bad because, trigger warning, at the time, Sharon was pregnant with Cap's baby. Or at least, so everyone assumes. And following the stab, she's no longer pregnant. Which is further bad news because it seems this was the primary reason Skull was keeping her alive. Though much of what I'm about to say isn't actually explained until Captain America Rebirth, it seems readily clear, at least to me, that Skull was trying to pull a Vigo the Carpathian and put his consciousness into a possibly super soldier serum enhanced baby. I mean, he'd already done things like that in the past. He'd already put his consciousness in a clone of Captain America before, but when that body was killed by Winter Soldier, he went into Lucan's head. And two minds in one body is not really working out, it seems, and realizing they'd both die if he doesn't get out soon, Skull had been looking for somewhere to go. Without the baby, he instead tries a different route. With the help of Arnim Zola, an evil Nazi scientist who put his own consciousness into a robot body to help explain how he could still be alive today, they attempt to use Sharon's connection to Steve to pull a time-lost version of Captain America into the present so the Skull can put his consciousness into the real deal. But Sharon manages to resist the pull of the machine they use to achieve this, and with Black Widow and Falcon attacking their base, they realize they don't have time to try again and instead attempt to simply flee. Only Sharon manages to wake up enough to find a gun and shoot the Lucan Skull dead. And the William Cap pops up out of nowhere and kills Zola, then simply disappears. Bucky and Falcon rescue Sharon, who has conveniently forgotten about her baby because Faustus told her to, and Tony and Falcon decide they're not gonna tell her until, quote, the time is right, which is all kinds of problematic. I like a lot of Brubaker's vision for this series, but man, what he does with Sharon is not great. I don't even have the words to say on this. It's just kind of messed up, but you know. Black Widow convinces Wright to end his run for president and step down as a senator, and the comic ends revealing that Arnim Zola transferred both his consciousness and the Red Skull's into new robot bodies, which Skull is not happy about, but I am, because it looks hilarious. And because it means it's time for the breakdown. As I was talking earlier about this being the post 9/11 era, I think the main thing that strikes me about this comic is the art, because it comes from that period where comics had to be darker and grittier, because that's what comic companies thought the typical post 9/11 reader wanted. And I guess I can't really say for sure that they were wrong, but it is striking to look back now and just be a little overwhelmed by how much pure black filled these pages. Everything was just covered in absolute shadows, to that almost pure noir look of being completely black and white, even though there are colors here. But those colors are super muted to the point that even Cap's literal red, white, and blue outfit can look kinda dull. It's such an interesting contrast to the overall still ridiculous and silly comic book logic that kinda guides the story. But while both of those could be bad things and prove a disaster when mixed together, it just kind of works. I love Brubaker's take on old characters and revival of mythos, and the fact that they managed to tell a story still mired in old comic book craziness while somehow grounding it in a more modern War on Terror feel that, for perhaps the first time, really felt like it updated Captain America to the 21st century is absolutely amazing to me. It's funny that in order to do that, they had to kill Cap, but hey. It's also funny, and this is no real fault of the comic really, that at the time we were still so convinced that it would take a criminal mastermind on the level of Red Skull having all kinds of devious connections and master plans and puppet governments to bring the country to its knees. When all it really took was one idiot reality TV show host who lied a lot. But again, that's no fault of the comic. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of very high. The creative team really made the best they could of this story, using it to really propel the Captain America mythos forward into the 21st century as opposed to just clearly being a gimmick for sales. But either of those reasons might be good enough to recommend someone pick it up and read it. The collected edition gets 1. Faustus Monocle, 1. Robot Arm on the Loose, and 1. Captain America's Mighty Shield. In sufficiently muted colors though, of course. Which goes from kinda bad to kinda good. Which then breaks down like this. All 3 volumes are 6 issues, but the 3rd volume has no bonuses and the 2nd volume has only a couple pages of an alternate cover gallery. The 1st volume though has a cover gallery, a bunch of bonus art, and even a behind the scenes essay about the media coverage surrounding Cap's death and the general reaction to it. Honestly surprised they didn't go all out with bonuses on these books, but at least there's something, I guess? Thanks everybody for watching. My break from Green Lantern should continue for at least another week, but I should be back with Red Lanterns before the end of the month. If you're excited about that, or if you like this video, or if you're just here to hate on me, then please consider clicking like and subscribe so you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.